Morning, all. All right, so in my continuing look at the NHL's history, season by season, we are up to the 1956-57 season. And as you can see, the Detroit Red Wings are back to first overall, but since I'm sporting a Montreal look, it tells you who won at the end. What's interesting is that, of course, since the last time I did this series, I've acquired a lot more different Montreal looks. It's going to make it less monotonous for people watching, I would think, as well as for myself going, all right, I'll put it on again. So Detroit finishes first, 38, 20, and 12 record. Red Kelly, their captain, 198 goals scored, 157 goals against. They finished with 88 points atop the league. They start the season 12, 3, and 4 in the months of October and November. The Montreal Canadiens, they're 35, 23, and 12 on the season, 82 points. So their ascension to the top doesn't last, but Detroit, as you can see, doesn't end up winning in the end. 210 goals scored by Montreal, 155 goals against. Maurice Richard is their captain, because you want a nice level-headed individual as your captain. 11, 9-2 record in the months of October and November. I'm just, because we're getting into some Richard stuff again today, so there you go. Boston, 34, 24, and 12 record for 80 points, 195 goals scored, 174 goals against. Fern Flaman is their captain. 11, 5, and 4 record in the months of October and November for Boston. The New York Rangers, 26, 30, and 14 record, 66 points on the season, 184 goals scored, 227 goals against. Harry Howell is their captain. 6, 10, and 5 record for the Rangers in the months of October and November. So rough start. They go 500 from there on, so they do get better. Toronto, 21, 34, and 15 on the season, so rough year for them under coach Howie Meeker. 57 points for the Leafs, 174 goals scored, 192 goals against. Ted Kennedy would come out of retirement, and he's the captain for that season. 5, 10, and 6 record for Toronto through the months of October and November, and it really doesn't get better from there. Chicago, on the other hand, 16, 39, and 15, still down at the bottom of the league. 47 points for them, 169 goals scored, 225 goals against. Just overall miserable numbers. While Toronto fans could look at the Rangers numbers and say, man, we could have caught the Rangers, and how did the Rangers get there? Chicago doesn't have that argument. Gus Mortson's the captain for the hapless Hawks at this point. 4, 14, and 3 is their record through the months of October and November. It was a rough start to the season, and it didn't get better. So Terry Sawchuk comes down with mononucleosis and ends up temporarily retiring due to that. So Don Simmons is forced to go in for the Boston Bruins and take over. He does a pretty good job. Sawchuk does not stay retired, but I totally get how with mono and how it drains you and you have no energy and all that. I totally get why a player would think, well, this is my life now and I'm done. But yeah, Sawchuk will be back, and it'll be with the Detroit Red Wings as well. So that reunion is going to take place. December 25th, 1956, Gordie Howe has a pretty good Christmas. During that Christmas game against the New York Rangers, he scores 3 goals and 3 assists in what was an 8-1 victory for the Detroit Red Wings over the New York Rangers. Ted Lindsay angers the owners. He forms the NHLPA. He spearheads it. So the union comes into existence here, and the owners really think that's a bad idea. They hate it, to the point where, after the season, Ted Lindsay's traded to Chicago. It's punishment. Even though later it would be said that Ted Lindsay taught Chicago how to win. They also trade Glenn Hall to Chicago. I'm not sure what Hall did, but there you go. April 6th of 1957, Rocket Richard ties a playoff record with 4 goals in a 5-1 win over the Boston Bruins, because that's a bad matchup for the Bruins. January 5th of 1957, CBS is the first of the U.S. networks to nationally televise a game. The Rangers beat Chicago 4-1 in a matinee game at Madison Square Garden. So you got a pretty good game there. The Rangers win it. And hockey is shown on nationwide TV in the U.S. January 6th of 1957, so the next day, Ted Kennedy comes out of retirement to help the struggling Maple Leafs at Howie Meeker's behest. The coach, realizing this is all falling apart, we need Ted Kennedy. Kennedy produces all right, but he retires again at the end of the season. February 11th of 1957, Ted Lindsay's named the first president of the newly formed NHLPA. This is why the award that the players vote on is called the Ted Lindsay Award. He was ahead of his time, and he paid the price. Like I said, he ends up getting traded to Chicago as a punishment. So think about that for a second. You get traded somewhere flat out as a punishment. The owners don't even really hide the fact that they don't like you for doing that, and now you can go play in Chicago. January 10th of 1957 at 18:14 of the third period. The Habs are up 1-0, but they're not happy with the officiating. See, Frank Udvari was calling penalties that they felt weren't right, and he wasn't calling penalties on the Leafs, in their opinion. So, with them ahead 1-0, at 18:14 of the third period, he calls a penalty on Rocket Richard, which happens because it's Rocket Richard, right? So the Leafs scored during the power play that follows to tie the game at 1, and Rocket kind of loses his cool. I would imagine he went and retrieved his stick, went over to discuss things with the referee while his own teammates are holding him back like, no, and they prevented him from maybe a lifetime suspension there. But at any rate, yeah, Rocket Richard loses it again and has to be restrained from going after an official. The Habs did win the game 2-1 with 6 seconds left. But what happened is that the fans, they go after the ref. They're throwing things on the ice. They're mad at the ref. The ref needed a police escort to get out of there. And then Clarence Campbell, who for some reason still has a box at the Montreal Forum. I wouldn't sit there if I was Clarence Campbell personally, because it's 30 minutes later before Clarence Campbell is able to leave the building. Again, police escort necessary. So first, the fans get, really mad at the referee and start, going after him. And then when the referee's not available, well, we go after Clarence Campbell because we hate him anyways. So yeah, it's not a great setup all around. So people boo Gary Bettman and, people are booing Gary Bettman. It is not like the hate that Clarence Campbell had during his tenure as the guy running the league. Power play goals increase. And what's curious about this is they go from 251 the season before to 265. That's after the NHL changed the rules so that when a power play goal is scored, the penalty ends. So instead of having the full 2 minutes for every single power play, we don't anymore, because if a power play goal is scored, that ends the power play. And teams actually get better on the power play. Although Montreal scores 10 less power play goals that year than the year before. So it's a rule change meant to punish Montreal, and it works. Gordie Howe leads the league in scoring that year. 70 games, 44 goals, 45 assists, 89 points. Ted Lindsay of the Wings as well. 70 games, 30 goals, 55 assists, 85 points. Jean Beliveau of the Montreal Canadiens, 69 games, 33 goals, 51 assists, 84 points. And Andy Bathgate with the New York Rangers, 70 games, 27 goals, 50 assists for 77 points. In net, Glenn Hall plays every game for Detroit because that's what he does. 38, 20, and 12 record, 2.23 goals against, 4 shutouts. Jacques Plante in Montreal, 31, 18, and 12 record, 2.00 goals against, and 9 shutouts. Lorne Gump Worsley in New York, 26, 28, and 14 record, 3.24 goals against, 3 shutouts. Ed Chadwick in Toronto, 21, 34, and 15, 2.66 goals against, average, 5 shutouts. The Hart Trophy ends up going to Gordie Howe of the Wings. The Art Ross also goes to Gordie Howe of the Wings. The Norris Trophy goes again to Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens. The Calder goes to Larry Regan of the Boston Bruins. The Vezina goes to Jacques Plante of the Montreal Canadiens. And the Lady Byng goes to Andy Habetton of the New York Rangers. Shouldn't be hard for me to say. Every now and then I stumble over a name. The All-Stars at the captain position, first team is Jean Beliveau of the Habs. Ed Litzenberger of Chicago is the second team All-Star. On the right side, it's Gordie Howe and Maurice Richard. This year, it's Richard second team, Howe first team. But they just switch back and forth. They're the best right wingers in the game. On the left side, Ted Lindsay again is the first team All-Star for Detroit. Doesn't change the fact they move him to Chicago. Doesn't keep him in Detroit. Real Chevrafils is your second team All-Star on the left side for the Boston Bruins. On the blue line, Doug Harvey of the Montreal Canadiens and Red Kelly of the Detroit Red Wings are the first team All-Stars. Fern Flaman of Boston and Bill Gadsby of the New York Rangers are second team. In net, Glenn Hall of Detroit's the first team All-Star and Jacques Plante of the Montreal Canadiens second team. And again, Hall ends up being traded to Chicago the following year. Your semifinals. Boston secures a upset over Detroit. So Boston wins the first game in Detroit 3-1, and then Detroit destroys them in the second game 7-2. but Boston fights back. They go home, they win 4-3 and 2-0 respectively before winning Game 5 in Detroit by a score of 4-3 to win the series in 5. Whereas the New York Rangers and Montreal Canadiens, it doesn't go great for New York. New York has the first 2 games at home, even though they didn't have home ice. My guess is circus. So the Rangers lose the first one at home against Montreal 4-1. They win the second game in overtime 4-3, but then games 3 through 5 are all played in Montreal, and Montreal makes them pay. Montreal wins the third game 8-3. They win the fourth game 3-1, and then in the final game of the series, they win in overtime 4-3 over those Rangers. Montreal wins the series in 5 games to set up a series between Montreal and Boston, which is a bad matchup for Boston. Montreal wins the first 2 games at home 5-1 and 1-0. They then go to Boston and win 4-2 to go up 3-0 in the series. Boston does win to get off the schneid and get a win in the series. They win 2-0 in Game 4 before Montreal wins at home 5-1 to win the series 4-1, and it's another Stanley Cup for Montreal as their dynasty builds. Geoffrion had quite the playoffs. 10 games, 11 goals, 7 assists, 18 points. Beliveau had 6 goals and 6 assists over those same 10 games. Rocket Richard had 8 goals and 3 assists in those 10 games. And Dickie Moore, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points in 10 games for Dickie Moore. Plant had a goals against in those playoffs of 1.66. Simmons for Boston had a goals against of 2.9. So yeah, Montreal was basically head and shoulders above everybody else come playoff time. That was going to be a thing for a while. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event that you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.